Okay, I got the thumbs up from Mariah. So we are going to get started. We have a lot to go over today. Very excited to have everyone here today. So today is the second session of our Workforce Professional Development series. We're going to be specifically talking about how to craft effective job announcements. But before we get started, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items and our intro slide. So this is the entire STAR Center team. We actually are all on the call today. So if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to reach out to us. Also, throughout the presentation, you can unmute yourself, or I believe you can unmute yourself to ask a question. If not, please go ahead and use the chat. So we are here today. Oh, and I see there's something in the chat. Oh, and Helen is saying hello to everyone. So we're here today with the Association of Clinicians for the Underserved, or ACU. So we were started about 25 years ago by National Health Service Corps alumni. So still very much at the core of what we do. But as you can see here, focus is access to care, offering support to those who serve the underserved. And we have many different programs, training, resources, including our vision services, our justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work, and many, many more. And one of those programs we work with is the STAR Center. Oh, my slides are not, there we go. The STAR Center. So that's what we're here today. And really what I want to point out from this slide is we are one of the 21 national training and technical assistance partners. We are funded by the Bureau of Primary Healthcare, so that means that our resources, including this webinar, they're all free, including the training, technical assistance. You can go to our website right here on the slide. Everything is hyperlinked and you will get the slide deck. You can also contact us at this email. And actually, this email goes directly to me and then I filter it out to the team as appropriate. So as I mentioned, just some housekeeping items. The session is being recorded. We are going to email the recording to everyone who registered, including sending the PowerPoint slides. Feel free to, as I said, use the chat box to ask any questions. You don't have to wait till the end. Please feel free to ask questions throughout. I'll periodically go and check the chat box to see if I'm missing anything. And since we have my other team members on the call, they can also help out keeping track of that. And then if you do have any technical difficulties, Mariah is our go-to person, so she'll be able to help you out. Oh, and I see there's something in the chat. Oh, yeah. So Danielle, Alex put in the, the website. So thank you for that. And then at the end, we will have an evaluation. So please fill that out. That really helps us know like what we can do to bring you the best webinars and the content that you're looking for. And then, yes, thank you, Alex. Okay, so what is the purpose of the professional development series? And if you were here for session one, or you have been here for the ones that we've done in the past, you know that it really is that space for providing professional development and collaboration. So we really want to focus on the areas of workforce recruitment and retention efforts and be able to give you the information that all of you are looking for, such as today, which is how to craft those job announcements that will hopefully get you the right mission-driven candidates in the positions that you need for your health centers. Or if you are PCAs or other organizations, you can really learn about this and then how to talk to health centers about crafting their job announcements. And it's also useful for yourself. And then we're going to accomplish this really in a 4-step process. So as I said, the professional development, it is also part of a train the trainer. So really depending on how you're looking at this content is what you'll get out of it. It's about building your network. So that's why we really want all of you to use the chat, ask questions. You know, if the fellow attendees ask questions that you can also respond to, or you have resources or anything, please feel free to share that in the chat. It's about keeping you informed with everything that is currently going on, especially there's so many things changing so rapidly in the workforce space, and then hopefully bringing you some inspiration of things you can take back with you to your health center to implement, or like I said, if you're a PCA, HCCN, other NTAP or other organization, you can use this as a train the trainer. So if you've been at any of the ACU webinars that we've done, you know that most usually 9 times out of 10, we use Mentimeter. So I'm going to be asking just a few questions just to kind of get everything started. And then if you could go to menti.com, put in this code. Also, if you have your phone, oh, excuse me, I'm so sorry. I still have a bit of a cough, so if I have to go on mute, it's just because I need to cough really quickly. My apologies. You can also put your phone up to this QR code, and I believe that Helen, yes. So Alex, thank you. Put the direct link to the Mentimeter in the chat so you can use that as well. So the first question that we're going to ask is about how long you've been involved in the workforce, just to get a sense of who is in the room. Now, I'm not asking this in the Mentimeter, but feel free to put in the chat who you are, what health center, PCA, HCCN you're from, what your role is, anything else that you may like to add on. So if everyone can just give me one quick moment, I'm going to switch over to our Mentimeter. Okay. Oh, there we go. People are already responding. That's always great when we see that. So most people are fairly new, 1 to 3 years, but it seems to be like a pretty good across the board. So we have more than 5 years, about 8 people, some people that are really new, oh, a lot more newer. Great. So hopefully this really will give you some new information again that you can take back with you and you can utilize. So the next 2 questions are really more icebreakers, but also it was strategically selected because I want you to think about, we're going to be talking about job announcements. We're going to be talking about how are you promoting your health center to get the right people into your organization. And of course, if you are looking at this as a train the trainer, take that lens for it. But a lot of it is how do you use words? How do you describe where you're working? So the next 2 questions really get you thinking along the lines of storytelling. So the next question is, what is your favorite movie, TV show, book, podcast, any story-based media that you like? And this is also good because you probably can get recommendations from other people, and it lets us know a little bit more about each of you. And then I see we have in the chat a few people who put in. So we have Brian, who has been there, who has been at, he is the recruiting manager at Curry Health Network, and they have been there for more than 5 years. Nancy at Bi-State, Workforce Development and Recruitment Coordinator. Catherine, Myra, we have a bunch of people putting in, and welcome everyone. Really excited to have all of you here today. And then, oh wow, okay, so there's a lot coming up. Currently White Lotus. So I have to say with White Lotus, did not like the first season. Second season, much better. But Yellowstone, Parks and Rec, which is awesome show. King of the Hill. Okay, whoever put King of the Hill, great choice. Anything true crime, same thing here. Criminal Minds, Harry Potter. I feel really, I've never read any Harry Potter books or seen any of the movies, so I'm like one of the few people like that. And then, so again, this, and please take these as recommendations if you're interested in a TV show or a movie, but also again, I want you to think about, why do we like these things? Usually it's because they tell a really great story, and that's what keeps us engaged. And then the last question I'm going to ask before we get into today's content is, you're writing a book about your organization. So whether it's your PCA, your health center, wherever you work, what are you going to title it? And I want you to think about the words that you really would use to describe what that organization does. Like, what is the culture? What is the mission? And this may take a little bit longer, or you could even just put one word that you feel really describes the organization. Another thing I want to say, these are all completely anonymous, so we won't know, you know, who's responding to what. So you can be completely honest. And I see someone wrote Yellowstone. I don't know if that was for the TV show or but if that's what you want to name the book, that makes that is perfect as well. And then I see in the chat we have a few more people. Hi, Melissa. We have Kathy, Tisha, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, please let me know. Lisa, good afternoon. Myra, 20 years at Family Health Centers in San Diego. Awesome, so we have a really great group of people here. Okay, so turnover, I really like that. And hopefully with having more information on how to craft these job announcements, you can lower the likelihood of that turnover. Mission mysteries, I really like that. Cultural shift, understaffed and overworked. I love the honesty here. Tamale grandmother. So I don't know who wrote that, but like tamales are delicious. Let's see, how we create, inspire, and engage each other daily. Growth and discomfort. I really like that one because there's a lot of change that's going on, and growth really also does require some discomfort. Trying to move from a mom and pop to a leader in FQHC care, supporting connections, organized chaos. Also so accurate, care for our people and patients, organization name, our journey integrated and affirming healthcare, whole person care, old ways to the new technology. All right, all of you are really good at coming up with these titles. So again, the language you use, the words that you use to describe your organization, to describe bringing someone in, it's really, really important. And this is something we're really going to focus in today's presentation. And I see there's two more things in the chat. I always like to just make sure that I'm not missing anything. Yep. And hi, Angela, so who has been there for 8 years. All right, so let's go back to the presentation. Sorry about the back and forth, but thank you so much for everyone for answering that. Like I said, I think it just gets you thinking about the content that we're going to be talking about today. So let's move on. So to lay the foundation for what we're going to be talking about, especially if you've been at any other of the STAR Center trainings that we have done, you know that we have this recruitment ladder, and it really is about building all these different pieces. And we're going to be looking at that center part today about advertising, writing job announcements. But the reason that I wanted to put this slide on here is because you also have to think about all the pieces that come before that. So that's why it's so important that when you're doing any part of recruitment, any part of retention, you really have the full planning in place. As you know, we always talk about having a comprehensive workforce plan, writing it down. It's a really big part too of job announcements so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. You have a lot of the content that you need ready to go, and then you modify it based on the position. But one of the things that is really important, for example, is you have all the right people ready in your recruitment team, because you're going to have certain individuals that you would want to review these job announcements. And we'll get that into that a little bit more a little bit later. But for example, if you're putting out a job announcement for a dental assistant, you probably want to have someone who is currently in that role reviewing that job announcement, seeing if the language you're using makes sense, if you really are accurately describing what the role entails. So all of these pieces are really, really important to work together so that you're ready to advertise, not just for the role, but also your health center. And again, a few more things in the chat. Yes, Kathy, absolutely. So what we're going to be doing is, oh, and I see Mariah put it on there. Yep. And we're sending the recording along with all of the slides. Okay, so before we start into really diving deep into job announcements, what are things you want to look for? What are things that you want to think about? It's really important that you also understand the marketing and branding of your health center, because you're going to be bringing that with you as you're crafting these job announcements. And I see there's more in the chat, and just, you guys will see, I like to stop anytime I see that there's anything in the chat. And I normally also will read out what people write in the chat, just in case there's anybody who may not have seen it, or it's helpful for me to read it out. And then I will go back to the presentation. So as I mentioned, these are things that either need to be in place or that you're working on building. It's really important to know what is the brand of the organization that you work for. And of course, here we're focusing in on health centers, but for others who are working with health centers, how can you talk to them about ensuring that they understand their branding and marketing? Because job announcements really fall in line with this. And I think any of us know, when we are looking for jobs, we're probably going to go on the website of that organization to learn more about them, to see if this is a place where we want to apply. So all of those things, like, what does it mean to be your health center? What does it mean to be your organization? Is it a recognizable brand? Do you have, a specific logo? Do you have color, like a color scheme that you use throughout? What is your mission? Is that easily accessible? You want people to find out about who you are in an easy way. So as it says here, branding, it's really those unique meanings and distinctive features of your organization. And every health center is unique. There's a lot that is shared in the community health center world, but every single place, it's its own unique place, and it should be branded in that way. Now, when you're marketing, you are promoting those services, but you have to remember, you're also marketing yourself when you're recruiting. You're marketing yourself in those job announcements, you're marketing yourself in the interviews. So as much as you're bringing someone in, getting to know them, they're getting to know you just as much. So you want to really have an authentic and attractive and a visible brand. I know for me, when I have done any job searches in the past, if I find a job, there's a job announcement, it looks great. I go on the website and the website is just a mess, and I can't really find out anything about the organization. It really isn't something, again, that is attractive. I did not apply for those positions because I was just worried that everything seemed really out of place, and was that the place that I wanted to go work at? So these are all things to keep in mind. Now, this is not something that just happens overnight. It's a long process. And even if you're currently working on adapting that brand, building that marketing, you can still write really great job announcements and get really great candidates as you're working to build this. So as you can see on this slide, there's just some questions here to think about, which I think can be very helpful for you. And a lot of these questions are going to come back as we talk about the different tips on what are some really important things to put in your job announcements. So just some general importance of marketing and branding, and what you should really highlight. And in the same way that it has here, highlighting this as what you have in your organization, you should be highlighting these pieces as well in your job announcements. So justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, we're going to talk about that in a moment, why it's important to have a DEI statement in your job announcements. Pay equity, why it's important to put in salary ranges. I mean, that is very, very crucial. So all of these things that are written on here are things that you want to put in those job announcements across the board for all positions. It's just the other things that you adjust are then based on the specific things that you want for the person to perform in that job. Oh, and as it says in the bottom, it's really about telling others why your organization is worth working for. And that is what you want to capture. So let's go on now and talk about the meat of today's presentation, which is crafting the job announcements. Before I move on, and I don't think people were very good with the chat, but If anybody has any questions about marketing and branding, I don't see anything and I don't hear anyone, but again, if you do, feel free to just like pop it in the chat at any point. So where do you start with all of this? So now we're looking, when I was talking about that recruitment ladder, we're looking at that advertisement piece. You want to write your ads in advance, but you do need to customize them. But there are a lot of pieces that can be kept in a template. So for example, I mentioned about having a DI statement. That is very, very important. Put that in the template so that you know for every job position, you're going to automatically put it on there. What is the mission of your health center? Put that in your job announcements. But since it's going across all of the different positions that you're going to be advertising for, put it in a template, have it in your comprehensive workforce plan, something that you can quickly pull out and then make adjustments as needed. You know, and write it to be compelling. So how do you get that advertising to be compelling? Because right now, really what you're trying to do is break through all of that noise of all of the different job postings that people are looking through. So how are you going to capture their attention? And remember, what you're highlighting in these job announcements, when you're highlighting about your organization, culture, the population you work with, is because you're looking for these specific mission-driven individuals. So the language, again, going back to that, it is crucial. And as it says here, you know, highlight what makes your health center unique. What makes your community a great place to work and live. And then we're going to talk about including things like benefits. How do you use that language? So in the next few slides, I think it's 3 slides, I'm going to go through different bullet points that we'll talk about. Again, a lot of that stuff that you should be putting in the template that you're working with as you're crafting job announcements. Now, and just as I've said before, if you're not a health center, so you're looking at this as a train the trainer aspect, you can take all of this back to your health centers and talk to them about why including these pieces can be very valuable and helpful in their job announcements. So starting off, which I have already talked about, you want to mention the mission. That is crucial. Now, every single nonprofit needs to have a mission. So all of you have a mission. That is easy enough to put in. I usually would recommend somewhere at the top of the job announcement so people know what are your values, what are the goals of your organization, what are you trying to achieve. Now, I also will say missions, sometimes they're pretty long, they can be a long paragraph, they really should be like a simple sentence or two. So if that's not the case and you're like, we have a really long mission, it's going to take up a lot of character space, you can condense it down. But the core of it is telling people, what is your health center doing? What are their values? And this shouldn't just reflect externally with the populations that you're working with, but also it should reflect internally in how you treat and work with your workforce. Another thing that you really want to put on there, especially when you're looking at clinical positions, is the patient population you work with. I've seen a lot of job announcements, and I would say most of the time this is not included unless it's a health center that has a very, very specific patient population, and that's really what they're known for. But the reason that I point this out is, for example, myself, my training is in social work. And when we're training in school, we usually train with specific populations that we're interested in working with. So for a lot of people who are looking at these job announcements that are coming from that mission-driven background, they are looking to work sometimes with very specific patient populations. And having that on there in the job announcement, again, helps them break through that noise. And it helps tell part of the story of what your health center is about and who it's serving. So as we talked about language, you want to be positive. You want to use positive language. I have seen some job announcements that, and in no way is it intended in a negative way, but the language that has been used does not always reflect maybe the patients or the community in the most positive light. So, saying something like working with challenging patients, that doesn't really make people want to apply necessarily for a position. Now, in everything that I'm saying, you don't want to lie either, but you want to use more specific language that is actually describing who are they working with and what are they doing? What are they doing? So rather than saying, challenging patients, talk about, what are the day in and day out things that this role is expected to do when working with this patient population. And how does the health center serve the community in that way? Again, you're selling not just a position, but also your health center to bring someone into that role. Answering the why question. That is very, very important. You want people to go in, read the job announcement, and not really leave with all of these wondering questions about, well, what would I actually be doing? Why would I want to work there? You want a lot of this to be answered in the language that you have written down for them. So part of it is, why does your health center value its patient population? Why does your health center value its workforce? Why does it serve the community? So all of these things, and it's important, these things don't have to be long paragraphs. You're not telling this very in-depth story, but you're giving people enough information to let them know that when they come to work at your organization, that they're going to be doing that mission-driven role. They're going to be part of a mission-driven organization that is serving a community, is serving a patient population that they care about and they want to work with. And I will also say, because I know I had mentioned, especially with clinical job announcements, but really this should be across the board for all job announcements, regardless of the position. So it's really, really, really important as well. So you're going to have on there, what are the requirements for the job? What are you looking for from someone? But you should also show with the words that you use how your health center cares about its workforce. So one of the ways to do that is when you're talking about benefits. Health centers tend to have pretty creative benefits. It's really part of the entire, or like the total compensation package that they're putting out there. And people don't always realize that. So highlight those unique benefits, because again, it's showing you care about the workforce. There was one posting that I saw that was really interesting, which I actually thought was a great idea. So they put on there how much PTO they give people, but they included, it was like a sub bullet point that said, but you actually will get to take this PTO. Because the truth is, and we know this across the board, regardless of what industry you work in, you may have great PTO benefits, but that doesn't always mean that the culture in the organization gives you the ability to use that time. So that really stood out to me, because I was like, wow, they really are showing, like, we want to make sure you take this time that we're providing you. Another one that again gives that impression, shows how you care about the workforce, that you care about these different social justice aspects, is including a salary range. Now, several states require this, so there's a lot of places that are already doing this, and they have to do it. But there are a lot that don't. One of the things that I would keep in mind, just very, very generally, is a lot of people who are looking for positions now are not going to really entertain a job announcement or apply for a job if there's not a salary range. And that is really important also for you, because you have a great candidate, they're really excited to work at this organization. They apply, they go through the first round of interviews, maybe the second round. At some point in that process, salary is finally discussed, and they realize that it really wasn't or in line with what they were looking for. So now you've spent time, You spend staff time, money, interviewing, talking with this person, even just reviewing their resume, their cover letter, those type of things where, you know, out of nobody's fault, it just wasn't going to work. So you can really mitigate a lot of that by including a salary range. At the same time, pay equity, compensation equity is fundamentally important. You know, all of you, whether you're in a health center or PCA, HCCN, other organization or nonprofit, you know, these values when it comes to equity are at the foundation of so much of what you do. And that, again, should be reflected back into the workforce and how you support them. So for a lot of job seekers, putting in a salary range is telling them like, okay, they do live up to those values. It's also important to keep in mind that if you are putting a salary range, that you can pay at the highest part of that range. And if not, that you have an explanation for why somebody may fall on one part of the salary range versus another. So there really needs to be a lot of transparency around compensation. We have also, and I haven't heard this as much, but I've heard it in you know, the past, where people talk about, you know, the current focus on salary and not necessarily on mission. And those two are not separate from each other. You know, having compensation equity and receiving a fair salary is very much in line with mission-driven work. So that's why we see here, these are two core things that are very, very important to include in your job announcements. And I know that one can be a little bit more controversial, but I really, really wanted to highlight it. Another thing too that one health center had told us, so Indeed, for example, if you don't include a salary range, they include like a guesstimate for you. That's another issue where someone may assume that is the actual salary range for the position. And again, you don't want that miscommunication. So you want to be the ones who are telling the story, who are putting out the language, that it's not being changed in any way, but you are leading that. So what else can you put? I highly recommend always taking a strength-based perspective on things. So sometimes we use language, as I talked about in one of the other bullet points, that's a little bit more negative because we want to be very realistic about the complexities of working in a health center, all of those things. I think people are pretty aware of that. You know, they're aware that these aren't always the easiest jobs, but if you actually list out what the actual roles and responsibilities of that position is, you're already giving people that information without making it seem negative. And I see there's something in the chat. Let me see. So Catherine wrote, do you ever see where the range for the position is posted, which is reflective of the level, but then also states anticipated starting salary? Yes. So I have actually seen that on Indeed. So are you and I just want to make sure, and Catherine, if I'm incorrect in misunderstanding this, please just put it in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. But I'm assuming you're talking about, you put a salary range in the position, but the place where you're posting also has like an anticipated salary range. I have seen that. Now, what's important is because you've put it in the job posting, you again are able to tell people like, this is specifically we as the health center are telling you, you know, it's not Indeed that is making this assumption. And it's something when people apply and they already, you're like, this is a great candidate, let's do a phone interview, immediately have that conversation with them about salary so that there isn't a miscommunication around that. But it does lower the likelihood of miscommunication if you yourself, like the employer, puts it in the job announcement. So I hope that's what you were asking in your question. So you said, no, there is a range for that position, which is reflective. So I actually, Oh, and then I see Alex wrote, I think the key here is to be able to explain. Oh, I see what you're at. Yes, yes. I'm sorry about that. I totally misunderstood. I thought you were
What
talking about.
what
Oh,
I'm Yes, I was able to unmute. So
okay.
what I'm saying is there is a salary range for that position. That is the range for like a coordinator level position.
Right.
But we are not starting people at the top of the range because there would be no room for growth if we did that.
Right. So I understand what you, and that's what I was saying, that when you're putting the salary range, you need to have, and which is what Alex put on here, basically an explanation about why somebody falls on the different parts of the salary range. And people are expecting that even if they're starting, that there is the possibility of getting the highest part of that salary range. So maybe it's worth putting it lower for that reason if you are, or, if the health center is not able to meet the highest end of that salary range. Because when we talk about compensation equity, those things should also change once someone is in the position. So the highest part of that salary range in the job announcement may actually end up being more after they've been in the role for a certain amount of time. But I will say that whatever you put for a salary range in your job announcement, you should be prepared to potentially pay at the highest part of that range. But I understand what you're saying, because it is reflective of the position. But when people are looking at this, they are saying, well, why am I on this part of it? What does your organization say why I'm on the lower end than on the higher end of it? And if that is the explanation of this is our starting salary, and as you move up, then you hit that higher end of the reflective range, that's totally fine. It's just being able to also offer that explanation. And then Brian said, I add how our comp is determined based on, relevant experience and education. Exactly. I think the biggest thing is that whatever you put on there, you can explain why you're offering someone what they're offering. Now, you may get the counter when they come back and say, well, I really feel like I should be on the higher end of the range. And then there you can negotiate and see what's appropriate. But I will say that if someone meets all of the criteria that is needed for that high end of the salary range, then do feel that you can meet that if needed. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I misunderstood your question. So thank you for clarifying that. And thanks, Alex, for putting the information on there. Yeah, just like everything, you just want to have those policies, procedures, all that stuff in place so that the transparency is there, both for the candidates that are applying, but also for the people that are currently working at your organization, so they know why those decisions are being made around salary. And then there's two more, so give me 1 second. So I saw Alex posted on there, and then Quentin says, also offering starting salary range rather than or in conjunction with general salary. Yes, yes, thank you for that, Quentin. Yep, absolutely. So what you put in your job announcement, it's a decision that you're making as an organization. It doesn't have to be, unless you're in a state that legally requires that, it doesn't have to be that full salary range specifically just for one position that you use across the board. You can modify it for what works for your health center and how you are going to be talking about this. And then it says, because there is a range for starting salary based on experience, but then if they meet the highest level for starting salary, they should have room to grow. Exactly. Perfect. Thank you, Quentin. So, and I know that there's a lot of conversation around this. And I think one of the most important things is you have to look about what's right for your organization, but at the minimum, putting in a range so that people don't look at a job announcement and they scroll through. That's one of the first things they're looking for. They don't see it, and then they move on. So another thing that you want to focus on is avoiding language that talks about a burned out environment, such as using, working under pressure. And again, this goes back to when we use a lot of this language, when we use these terms that are actually pretty vague. Like, what does that really mean? You're not giving people the full story, the full amount of information. So what does under pressure actually mean? You know, that they're expected to work an X number of hours, that they're expected, you know, to do these different things on a day-to-day basis. That's how you should use that language. It's listing out the specifics of the role so people know when they go into that position what they're actually going to be doing. Because sometimes that also is the issue around turnover is, again, a disconnect of what they thought the role was versus what the role actually ended up being. So using this vague language is really not helpful because people just are not sure what it means. Also, a lot of times using stuff like under pressure, things like that, people will automatically think, well, clearly if I go work here, I'm going to be burnt out. But for the candidates, we also have to understand people know that there's, you know, they're going to be working under pressure when they're working in healthcare, or most do. So again, be very specific and be able to defend and say why you are putting that information out there and why you have these requirements. Avoid gendered language. You know, that is really, really important, especially if you're using something like, you know, him or her. Make sure you do him, her, they. You just want to be as inclusive as possible. Very simple. Check for the grammar, check the spelling, sentence structures. You know, we're all so busy. So that's why you always want to have other people also take a look at this. Use or employ a user-friendly application process. This is really, really important because people, if they have to do a bunch of clicking, a bunch of steps, they may not go through the whole process. I was talking to a friend of mine who recently said, so, you know, oftentimes we have to submit the resume, we attach it, and then we go to the application process, and it makes you rewrite your entire resume. And this individual, they called that disrespectful. And I never thought about it that way. But if you think about it, there is a lot of truth to that. You know, it's really requiring people to do extra work for no reason since you're already having them submit the resume. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you don't want to lose great candidates again because they have to rewrite things, they have to click so much. Also make sure that if they're applying like through your website or something like that, that it's right at the front page, something they can easily find, click through and submit. You want to make the job announcements personal. So as I said, you have all those key things you want to put in there in the template, but there's a lot that you do need to modify for each specific position. And part of making it personal, though, is also talking about the mission, talking about how you support the workforce, talking about your patient population, all of those things. Really be creative. You know, again, you're trying to break through all of the noise. I talk a lot about this of one health center that I saw that had a job posting, and it was like kind of in the middle part of the job posting, they had a link. And the link took them just to a website that, or to their website that had like very, very short little videos about what it was like to live in that rural community. So they had like great hiking, you know, open spaces, all of these things. Again, they were sharing and promoting and branding the health center, the community, all of those things to get people who want to live in those areas to go work there. So another thing for clinical postings, very important to ensure that the clinical terminology is correct. I've seen a lot of this with behavioral health positions and job announcements, where when I look through the language that's used on what the organization is looking for, I can tell that the person who wrote it does not know behavioral health. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but this is where, when I talked about that recruitment team, bringing in the people who are in those positions to review these job announcements so they can tell you, hey, this terminology is not correct. Let's go ahead and change that. And that really speaks volumes to people because it says, okay, this organization understands what I do and they value that. Again, only ask for what you need. There is a lot, I've been reading less and less organizations now are asking for cover letters because they used to ask for them, but they didn't really review them. So if you're asking for something that you don't review, or it's just something extra, don't ask for it. You know, it's extra time for the person that is applying. It's extra time for you. Why add that on? Now, if it is something that's very important, absolutely put it on there. You want to put on there everything that the candidate has to submit. As I talked about, ensure accessibility, but this also means accessibility and, you know, for all types of diversities. You know, keep that in mind. So if you're posting it on your website and you have a background that clashes with the color that you're using for people who may be colorblind, who can't read it. So think about those things, be as accessible as possible. Make sure to also provide a contact person. A lot of times it's either a general email or, you know, you apply through a website, so you don't really have a contact person or HR department or anything like that. It's really helpful for people to know who are they reaching out to when they're applying for these positions. And as I say, these are a lot of things that I'm talking about when we talk about job announcements, but it's also important to be brief. And that's what's so important when you're using language, when you're branding, when you're marketing, you're advertising, all of these things, is that know how to say things with substance, but that are also brief and short. So we talk about, I remember when I was in school, a lot of my professors constantly talked about the like elevator pitch. You know, how do you convince someone to do something by telling them a sentence or two in a few seconds? So that is a skill, that is something that is practice, but I think the more that you can take these other tips and really kind of condense everything to just exactly what you need, you will find that you can have those brief, but job announcements that have substance behind them. And lastly, and I think this is what I had mentioned before, respect the applicant's time in the same way that, you know, the applicant, if they're going through an interview process, all of that should respect yours. So keeping all those things in mind can be really helpful as you look at your job announcements and you make adjustments as needed. Now, as I mentioned, the DEI statements, those are not the equal employment opportunity statement. This is a separate statement that says the commitment that your organization has to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And here's just an example from Central City Concern for their equity commitment that they have. If you have this, put it in your job announcement. If you don't, highly recommend drafting one. Again, these are mission-driven organizations, so it's important to show that you value this and that you're putting it out there in the language you're using and the way that you're advertising. We have a building an inclusive organization toolkit that has other examples. So this could be a great place to go if you want to get more ideas on this. Like I said, everything is hyperlinked on here. And although this is not, it's joined with the crafting of job announcements, when you're actually putting the job announcements out there, it's really important to think about where you actually posting them and not assuming that, you know, diverse candidates are going to come to you. You need to go to them. So go to organizations that are focused on hiring these diverse candidates and really expand out. And just on a side note, as I talked about, you know, write down your job announcement template. Also keep a chart in your comprehensive workforce plan on, you know, where you've advertised, how it has gone, and if it was worth it. So again, you know, these are the places that we've gotten good candidates. We haven't really yielded too many results on this other one, so why continue to use that? And to help with all of this, we do have, so we updated our comprehensive workforce plan template, and one of the charts that's on there is exactly that. Like, what are the key things that should be in the body of your job announcement? And you can use this as that template, you know, put on there your mission. So anybody who's writing this can take it, copy and paste it over, and they make the adjustments that they need for the job role. So everything here is hyperlinked. The QR code also takes you directly to that resource. And if you have any questions about any of this, you can also reach out to us any other time. And then before I begin to wrap up and ask the final question, I'm going to pass it over to Alex just for a few minutes. So we have reviewed a lot of job announcements for different health centers, and I think there's a lot of like lessons learned from that. So he was going to go ahead and share some of that information with everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Michelle. And yes, Michelle and I and Helen, our whole team review job announcements. So, you know, also if you want that one-on-one TA, here's our pitch for, we're more than happy to work with you, kind of look them over, give you any tips that we can offer. But we do see some common things, and some of it came up in the questions in the chat, and people making points about, you know, posting salary and salary ranges. And so that is one of the things that we see the most frequently, is that people don't put salary on there. And it can be hard, because I understand being kind of nervous about posting a salary, but at some point the candidate's going to have to figure out what the potential salary is, and you don't want to go through all the effort, all the recruitment of recruiting someone who just can't make whatever salary you can offer work. You know, it's also I think helps to, if you're really ashamed of the salary, maybe the organization needs to have a conversation over how can we figure this out. But at the same time, health centers operate on often very limited budgets, and you are able to offer really good benefits. And so really spelling out those benefits, and throughout the course of onboarding and throughout the tenure of an employee at your organization, benefits are one of those things that often go kind of unseen and unacknowledged. And I've seen some stuff where it's like, we're really paying you, you know, $100,000 instead of $80,000, and that's inclusive of all these benefits. Like, really explaining to people the value of the benefits goes beyond that, and it's something you should start doing at the very beginning. So kind of, you know, as that onboarding process goes on, explaining, you know, why saving for retirement is important, right? Especially for people who are newer to the workforce, or may just have never been able to save for retirement before. You know, some financial literacy classes may be important, and putting that under the benefits listing of the job announcement, saying like, you know, we provide lots of great benefits, as well as the support to make fullest use of them and to save you lots of money, or to help you save for retirement. You know, you can spell that out. And it's one of those things that for someone who really kind of may not fully understand what benefits are worth, but it may draw their attention to that and be like, oh, maybe there's more to it here than just this salary range that is listed. And then obviously with salary range, that can be a tricky thing. You know, you could say like, all right, well, we're going to post the starting salary range, so where we might possibly start someone. But you may have someone who is, you know, a veteran of that field come in, and you're probably going to want to start them like really close to the top. And that might be a discussion you have with the person in person, of, you know, with the candidate in person, and talk to them and say, we can stop you at the top. We can start you at the top of the salary range. We won't be able to provide, you know, annual raises or pay bumps down the road because you're at the top of the salary range. But as an employee, I would rather have that happen than be started a little bit low to be able to be given like a few small raises over time, because ultimately that's going to make more money for me. Like financially, it's much more beneficial. But obviously it could be a sticky point if you just don't tell them that they're not going to get raises down the road because you were already paying them the maximum amount. So again, think about how you want to advertise that in the salary range. And also there's, you know, some people, like I've been taught how to negotiate salary. Not everyone's been taught that. So like Michelle pointed out, as an equity piece, having that salary range and being able to very clearly articulate, here's why we pay what we do for people with different types of experience that's relevant to the job. This is how we calculate salary, makes it a very even playing field. So you don't have more pay going to the person who just happened to be taught to ask for more money than the person who wasn't taught that, or might see it as impolite or at risk of losing the job if they ask for more money. You make it much more equitable that way. like Michelle said, also something we see is people not describing the job or the health center or the community in a very positive way. And we don't mean, you should hide the fact that it might be a really challenging job. You want people to be able to come into that position and know what challenges are going to be faced. But, hopefully you can describe the way your health center operates and gets through those challenges in a way that shows the person, hey, if you come in and you work really hard, the rest of your team is going to work hard and you'll support each other. So I thought the point earlier about, here's how much PTO you get and you will actually be able to take that leave. Like that's something really important that supports that. So, we work in a health center that serves a very large community with very few resources beyond the health center. So we, are have a thriving patient population and we support them in every way we can. That means our team works very hard as a team and supports each other and make sure that we are each able to take time to recover as needed so that we can all come to work every day, functioning at our best. Something like that still shows that it's going to be a challenging work environment, right? You might even be able to say the average practitioner sees this many patients per day at our health center, and they have a team that supports them in this way. So you're making it very clear what's going on. And that's where, again, you need to talk to someone in that role to be able to adequately describe what's a day in the life look like. But you can still describe it in a positive way that shows this is a challenging environment and here's how we surmount that challenge as a team, right? So those are kind of the main things that I wanted to pull out. We're happy to help you kind of work on language specifically, how do you incorporate the mission statement into things like that. But the biggest thing is just think, does this make this seem like a place that I would want to work? But also tells me what working here is really going to be like. And that's what you want to keep in the back of your mind as you're reviewing these job postings.
Yeah, and just really quickly, because I know we are almost at time, just to expand a little bit on what Alex said, and thank you so much for sharing that. Why I say this is important for the language and the story and talking about who and what your health center is, what it does, is that, you may not be able to compete at the same salary with, a hospital system or something like that, but you really are supplementing that total compensation with the benefits that you're highlighting. And then further, you're really showing the organizational culture that you're building to support your workforce, because we know people leave bad managers. So the more that you can put in there, the full scope of everything you offer, it really catches people's attention. And I do see that there's some question in the chat, so I'm happy, and I'm going to skip this, but I want you to think about, when you go back, what is one change that you would do to craft more effective job announcements? So something you can automatically implement once you get back to your job, or if you are going, again, the trainer, how can you talk to the health centers you work with about what they can put into their job announcement? So just think about that as you leave. We know it's a lot, so it's just about getting started. And then most of the questions were asked throughout, so you will get this slide deck, which has all of these different resources you can use. Our next session is on February 16th, and we are looking at the National Health Service Corps as a recruitment and retention tool, so please join us. For that, in a moment, Mariah is going to put the evaluation for today's session, but I did want to answer the question, so I'm happy to stay on for a few extra minutes to answer Daniel's question, which is it a good idea to have a range 5% above or 5% below the actual amount of the starting salary? And then I see that Alex had put on here, yeah. So what's important is really, it needs to be realistic. It needs to work with what your health center needs are. So if you realize, okay, it really makes sense to put 5% below, so then we have some wiggle room here, that makes sense. You're putting 5% above, again, just be aware that there are people that may meet that criteria and say, well, I really, my goal was to be at the highest end of this salary range. It's also something that you can see what works and what doesn't. If you try one and it really didn't yield the results that you thought, you try the other. Again, write this down, put it in your comprehensive workforce plan, see what works and what doesn't for your health center. But I would recommend that if you want to leave some of that wiggle room, it can be helpful. Now, if you're putting below, also make sure that it's not showing that overall all of the salaries across the board in the location that you're in, that you're so far below that or something. You don't want that either. But it is important to see what works for your health center and your finances. And then I see Alex is putting more on there. So thank you. Yep, Alex is answering with even more detail in the chat. And then if there are no other questions, I really appreciate everyone being here today. Again, we have the next session on February 16th and then our final one on March 16th. Thank you for just staying over a few minutes. And then you will have all of these slides with all of these links for all of these different resources. And of course, sign up for our newsletter if you would like. And then let me see the chat. So thank you so much, everyone. And again, reach out if you have any other questions. And of course, please fill out the evaluation and have a wonderful afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.